Hello everyone and welcome once again to another video. I'm glad to be here with you after the better part of a month and a half or something like that I had been battling with illness, and even though I am not up to 100% apparently, I am good enough to be able to make videos once again, and I missed the better part of the Lord of the Rings of Power Amazon series, but I think that was also a blessing because I did not have to endure the terrible disaster that was the Rings of Power. And now that it has finished, we are going to go through this post-mortem in which we're going to analyze what happened with this show, and we're going to answer the question whether it is a good show or not. I suppose that you already know the answer to that, just as we all knew who really was going to be Sauron and who the stranger was going to be. So without further ado, let's dive into it, not without first having this warning: there will be spoilers, so if you haven't watched the show or you haven't watched the ending, click away right now because this is going to be filled with spoilers for the Rings of Power, all the 8 episodes, and let's get into it right now. From the very beginning, the Rings of Power sparked controversy because the showrunners, the producer, and even the studio head all claimed that it was important for this show to represent modern views from the audience and also represent our world, and that it was fit, the source material, for such a take. At the same time, also, they claimed that they wanted to quote-unquote write the greatest novel that Tolkien never wrote. Whether they were capable of that might be up for interpretation, but in reality, when looking at the outcome with the numbers, when you look also at the reactions, when you look at how engaging the show really was, you can see that that is not the case, that they didn't write this greatest novel that they wanted to write. If you pay attention to what some consultant analysts said when they were reviewing The Rings of Power and how they fell asleep in different episodes, and how they saw that the impact that the show really had was very little in comparison to maybe other things, well, you can see that it's not really the case, that they have been lying, and that it's not really true, that this show is impactful and that it is the greatest novel that Tolkien never wrote. It was evident for anyone that had the vision to look at it with anticipation. And if you remember, many were called East Fove and every other name under the sun for criticizing such takes even before this show aired. But in reality, it was just an educated guess, and it was also paying attention to what's going on, looking at what people are saying, how they are saying it, when they are saying it, and for what reason. If you remember also, back in the day, Amazon tried to get quote unquote super fans excited over this thing that didn't even watch the show. Now, granted, some of these people were influencers that were involved in literature, and perhaps they didn't do their homework correctly over at Amazon and they just hired them because of that. But the truth is that they saw a diverse cast of influencers and they wanted them in so that they were the spokespeople of this show. Look, we are getting diversity in and out of the show as well. Then they tried to course correct by getting quote unquote scholars, experts, and they were invited to Oxford where they had this 20-minute look. They had a talk with the showrunners and they claimed our concerns have been somewhat assuaged and we do believe that they are the perfect fit for this show. Now, granted, they didn't speak about the minutes that they saw, whether the show was good or not. They mostly talked about how they felt more comfortable with the showrunners and that their, second thoughts and their doubts were a little dispelled by talking to them. And if you remember, many people, including myself, criticized these people for going over the board, trying to defend the show and trying to claim what seemed to all of us just shilling. And it apparently is true. We were right all along, and these people, well, they really didn't know what they were talking about. Perhaps they were paid for that. They were paid for having this take on the show, on the showrunners, to put their faith in them. But the matter of the fact remains that after watching the show, it is evident that the show was not this great thing, that the showrunners were not the perfect fit for it, and that also the lore was getting disrespected left and right, and that all that wait and see until you look at the first episode, well, that was completely unnecessary because everyone could see that this was a major disaster. Also, when you pay attention to the story and what they said over at Comic Con about going back to the book, well, I think that it's quite evident and it is unnecessary to repeat it. They didn't go back to the book, they didn't care about going back to the book, they only cared about trying to tell their own story and disrespect Tolkien every step of the way. Because we had law breaking in the characters, such as Galadriel, that was depicted as this insufferable individual. Whether you are talking about a man, a woman, an elf, whatever you want, when you have a character that treats their subordinates like garbage, when you have this character threatening a suffering individual with killing every single one of those people that he cares about, when you have this character acting like a Karen, demanding to speak to the manager because she didn't get her way, well, you get this insufferable feeling, and of course it's an unlikable character. The fact that this is your protagonist doesn't help at all and sinks the show even lower. So if we are talking about a boring show, a boring script that is poorly written, when you add a main character that acts in this way, nothing good can come out of that. If you also take into consideration in the law breaking how many other things were wrong, such as Elrond and Celebrimbor and killing, quote unquote killing, right, Celeborn and Tarmiriel being the Queen Regent on behalf of her father, and the visions and Galadriel's visit to Numenor, and how Halbrand, another major character in this show, enters Numenor and all that. It's all pointless and completely derivative from the source material, and it doesn't really add anything of value to any Tolkien fan or any Tolkien scholar that really is a serious person. Couple that also with how the show breaks its own narrative and breaks even the smallest of the laws, and you get a disaster of a show. And I'm not talking about that controversy with the Numenorian ships carrying horses and soldiers at the same time, but more talking about how they seem to have teleported out of nowhere, from Numenor to Middle Earth, because they didn't really take that long in arriving into Middle Earth. At the same time, also in that episode or episodes later, when you have this a volcano erupt only by throwing water into it without understanding how that physical phenomenon takes place really, well, you also have something of a moment of get out of here, because you can't really believe that this is serious. And many people defended that by saying it's just a fantasy show, this is supposed to be fantasy, why are you such a nitpicky individual? Let me tell you something. This might be fantasy, and what Tolkien wrote is fantasy because the races do not really exist in the real world. But the rules, the physics applied to it, and they applied quite well. If you think that people were happy with Peter Jackson making Legolas defy gravity all the time or play Mario Bros in the Hobbit trilogy, you are mistaken. Those are the points of criticism that many people have found fault with. But to go and say that people survived the pyroclastic flow of a volcano when it is one of the hardest things and one of the things that runs the fastest and kills everything and anything on its way, then this becomes a complete far out excuse, a poor excuse actually, for defending this crapfest of a show. After that, you have many more elements that break the law. But one of the worst things that they could have done was having Harfoots, because in the words of the showrunners themselves, it is not talking if you don't have hobbits, right? Then they say, "Oh no, no, it's not a hobbit story; it's a Harfoot story," as if they were two different things. But we already knew that they had claimed that what is a Tolkien story that does not have hobbits, because hobbits are one of the most popular and loved characters all over the Tolkien legendarium, and even normies love the hobbits. And the thing here is that with these characters, the Harfoots, people feel completely baffled, and they deem them cruel individuals. They deem them cruel creatures. And because of that, I think that we can also question what was the point of having hobbits, or hobbit adjacent creatures, if you were going to make them cruel people, despicable individuals as well. So, as you can see, every single thing that they claim they added because they wanted to respect the show, they respect the lore, respect the fandom and all that, that didn't really bear any fruit at all. If you also couple that with the reveals that at the same time, I will say it, many of us saw, and I'm talking about small channels like mine. I know that Neurotics also shared this idea. I don't know if he came into that conclusion the way I did just by looking at the trailers, or if he had some information, because he of course has insiders and people being a big channel and having some contact and having worked inside Hollywood for a time. Of course he has some contacts there. But whatever the case, the fact that a big channel like Neurotics talks about this, and the fact that a small channel like myself and channels in the middle like European Law talk about this, there's something in there, right? Even before the show aired, we knew who Sauron was going to be. We knew that Halbrand was Sauron. We knew it from the very beginning. I mean, I just saw that trailer in which they are sharing like a ship or something, the little barge that they were in, Galadriel and Halbrand, and I knew that that was going to be Halbrand, and that was going to be how Sauron was going to travel to Numenor. And with the stranger, quote unquote the stranger, I think that everyone knew that that was supposed to be Gandalf, and with that little quip out there that resembles what Gandalf said in The Fellowship of the Ring from Peter Jackson, well, you got more than confirmation that the stranger is actually Gandalf. And maybe the thing that we didn't see coming was the priests being the ring wraiths or something like that, but it doesn't really matter, because by that time I think that the show had already lost all the people that could have been interested in this thing. And that is because the show really is terrible. The show has poor writing, the dialogues are terrible.
Are you a castaway, grasping for a handhold in a tempest?
There is a tempest in me. It swept me to this island for a reason.
And many scenes and characters make no sense or are completely unnecessary, like Isildur's sister, for example, that does really nothing at all. And that is a testament to the poor writing, the poor direction from the showrunners, and also the inexperience that they have, that is really a weight that sinks this thing down. Pretty much, the show, like The Rock, looked down, and that is its ending. And that begs the question, alongside many other things, for example, the costumes as well, and the printed armor that we have talked about before the show aired. Well, those things beg the question, who was this for? What was the intention when creating this thing? Clearly it was not for the fans, because if you remember also, one of the showrunners called the fans, quote-unquote, patently evil for criticizing the show. At the same time also we have Jennifer Salke, who is the the head of the studio claiming that they knew what was going to happen, that not everyone was going to like this show, and that's why they decided to stop with the reviews and they held them back, which means that, in short, if you don't share their expectations, their excitement, and their opinions about the show, and you think that it's not the best thing ever, then your opinion is meaningless and totally worthless. So clearly, this was not for the fans. This was not for Tolkien either, because this doesn't honor the lore and his creative work. This is also not for new people because it's boring as hell, and because people, normal people that are not true Tolkien fans, and I mean that they are diving deep into the lore, well, they prefer other things, of course. They prefer the Marvel shows over at Disney Plus and the Star Wars shows as well, like Andor. They prefer, House of the Dragon from HBO. So they prefer other things that really don't have anything to do with Tolkien. And if the show was boring in its first 2 episodes, so boring in fact that they had to release them, both of them, at the same time on the same day, and pretty much the first half of the show is complete bore fest, like complete boredom, because it started picking up steam by the end of episode 5, the beginning of episode 6, in an 8-episode series, in an 8-episode season. Well, it's pretty evident that this is also not for people that love action and fantasy all mingled together. This certainly was not also for a wider audience, as they claimed, because Jennifer Salke said that this is supposed to be a big show, that many people had to like it and many people had to tune in. Otherwise, it was going to be a failure for them. And that is the big question. Who is this for? And the only answer I can think of, that I can come up with, is it was for nobody, really. They were just trying to rub their own egos, whether you're talking about the showrunners or Jennifer Salke or anyone else that is involved in this. They just rub their own egos with this thing. And it's really pointless to take a look at it. Many watched it so that you didn't have to. Many others watched it as well, but I think that just gives them what they want, which is views. If you are part of the controversy, I suggest that you do so on channels and areas where Amazon has very little to no influence at all. And if you talk about it, always try to do it respectfully, because on both sides of the spectrum we have seen attack after attack after attack, many of them sparked also by the shield media. And I think that was the only intention of this show, to divide the fandom. On one side you have all those that defend this thing, and on the other one everyone that hated it, and they are both in their right. What is not correct is that whenever someone claims to have liked it, that they are called fake Tolkien fans and every other name under the sun, and at the same time those that claim that they didn't like it, they are called Eastern foes, and they are called also every name under the sun. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. What is not valid is to attack them, and also to claim that just because you liked this show it is a masterpiece, because it really is not. You could have thrown in 2 billion, 3 billion, whatever quantity of money you wanted on this thing, and still it would be crap. And that is because that money was not properly used. It was not properly allocated, and the inexperience of the showrunners is everywhere. It can be seen in every single thing. So the show is not a masterpiece, not by a long shot. And it has some good things, like the scenery that comes from New Zealand, but that's just about it, really. I mean, it doesn't really have a lot of virtues. So you can claim to like it or to dislike it, but respectfully, and giving room for every opinion to exist. Just because someone is criticizing the show doesn't mean that they hate women and all those stupid things that they have been throwing at them, It's just an opinion, but it's also an informed one, considering that the show is in fact poorly written, that some of the acting is terrible, save maybe the praise where praise is due. Sofia Nomvete does a very good job, as well as Ismael Cruz Cordova, but apart from them, everyone else is just pretty much terrible in this show. So acting is also uneven. I mean, we have many things to criticize that go beyond just hating women, as many claim. The thing here is accepting that the things are good or bad on their own merit. But that is only my Viking view. Let me know your opinions down below in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.
There's a tempest in me.